To go even deeper into this topic of performing power, I'm really excited for our guest today, Bill Moyer, a co-founder of the Backbone campaign, which is one of the catalysts behind the kayaktivist flotilla here in Seattle in 2015. Bill, welcome.
Thank you, Eric. Really appreciate the opportunity.
So what is the Backbone campaign, and what do you do and how do you work?
Well, Backbone campaign evolved out of an affinity group of artists who had gotten together in around 2002 after 9/11, and we eventually moved into this idea of a theme around Backbone and did a lot of theme and variation on that. We do a lot of action support and have grown in the amount and the scale of the action support we do around the country for nonviolent, progressive causes. And we do a lot of training. Since 2009, we hold an annual training camp each summer.
And the action support and the training are about how to deploy art and theatricality and spectacle and kind of public experience to move people's ideas on an issue?
Absolutely. So we help grassroots folks, community organizations, change agents amplify their voice using tactical tools that they can apply to any number of causes that they work on, and help them understand how change happens and how they build power for an issue so that they can then extend that through the development of campaigns and building power for their communities.
So the kayaktivist flotilla, that whole staged kind of mega event in a way, right, which extended over a period of time, what was the genesis for that? And as it evolved, was it like going according to plan, or were you like, holy cow, this is a bigger or more interesting thing than we intended it to be? How did things unfold?
Well, that's an interesting question. Clearly, there were folks in Seattle who were already organizing and going to the port meetings. So I was in touch with them because we had been using kayaks in protests since 2009 on a fight against an industrial gravel mine on Maury Island, and asked if we could do a flotilla. Because it seemed to me and to a few others that it wasn't about keeping shell out of Elliott Bay. It was about using that moment to make things like climate change and Arctic drilling, things that are usually remote, make them tangible, and then create a David versus Goliath moment. There were a number of steps to doing that, though, because you don't just get 500 people to go out and blockade an oil rig because they in an escalated situation. You've got to first show them a picture of them doing that in a non-escalated situation so they can imagine themselves successful. And then this is cold water, so you've got to train them to be able to do that. And then, oh yeah, if you're actually successful at keeping it there, you've got to be able to be there at night. So then you've got to do stuff at night. So anyway, it became, so if you work backwards, you might remember, we got a lot of media attention from the trainings. We did a blimp. The very first thing we did is April 2nd, we lifted a blimp in the port, inviting people to join a flotilla. So then for all through May, up to May 15th is when we did the paddle in Seattle. We'd already trained, 200 people in kayaktivism.
The beauty of that arc, the thing that I love is the thing you said at the outset, which is you get to first show people literally a picture of what this could be.
Yeah,
right.
That's right.
And I think if you take that as so much of your work is metaphorical, if you take that as a metaphor, this seems to me to be the power of what you call artful activism in general, right? You're taking issues that are either remote or sort of intangible or ethereal, and you're trying to show them or make for them a picture, whether literally an image on paper or an event that they come upon. Say more about this notion of artful activism.
Well, my background is in music, and so we're always communicating with an audience, right? And you don't want to tell people what they already know and what everybody else is saying. You want to kind of say what they're thinking or feeling, but they haven't said yet. Nobody's saying yet. So you have that element of you're connecting with your audience there. You don't go too far ahead and lose them and put out some obscure thing that they don't have any way to ground that in their experience. So there's really a lot of communications that are involved in this. There's also giving people tactical tools that expand the field of the possibility, that push imaginary boundaries, like large banners at overpasses are not something that are illegal, they're just unusual. Light projection onto building, you're not hurting anybody, it's not illegal, it's just not used. So when we start to exercise our liberty in a way, and not accept constraints that are imagined constraints, we also start to free imaginative space for what is possible, both in our expression of power, but also in the communication of our values and our aspirations for the future we want to create.
So you've talked about tools a fair number of times, and it seems to me there are at least two types of tools embedded in what you're describing here. One is literally the tools of making the art or the spectacle or the theatrical experience, right? Whether it's the light projections or what have you, right? Then there's the tools of, okay, you've created that moment, you've awakened other people, you've expanded their imagination. Now literally, like, what are you going to do with that? How are you going to convert that into power as it relates to the state or to the corporation or whatever it is that you're trying to move, right? That second category of power tools, so to speak, how do you activate those or teach those?
We do presentations on grand strategy and the application of the art of war to nonviolent social change, so that we can help people understand the nature of conflict. There's such thing as attrition warfare, maneuver conflict, and moral conflict. And we can never fight when we're talking about guns and money because we don't have symmetrical power. We can occasionally maneuver into a place of advantage to transmit very compelling messages for short periods of time with maneuver and surprise. But for the most part, we exist in the realm of moral power and moral conflict. So what it's really about is hearts and minds. It's about aspiring, have people, when they see your action, identify that, oh, that's what I value. That's who I am. I value this place. I value future generations. I value what's sacred to me. And then everything else follows. But you have to, it's like in the, I know you're familiar with Colonel John R. Boyd and that school of grand strategy, but they talk about motherhood and mismatch. The idea that you want your cause to be the moral equivalence of motherhood, an unassailable good, so that whoever attacks you looks bad, and what you go after, you also you attack the mismatches between what a corporation or a politician, et cetera, say they're doing and what they're actually doing, what they say is real, and what people's experience of reality is.
So last question for you as we explore this, and this is just fascinating, but I think you've already hinted at this, the difference between opposing something and proposing something, right? It's embedded in what you said here, but I just want to get your last thoughts on how is artful activism, creativity, and imagination better deployed for one or the other, or do you feel like it needs to be deployed for both proposing as well as opposing?
I'm so glad you asked that. In equal measure, really. I feel that we often could be reactivists, always responding to the terrible thing. But, Naomi Klein's book, Shock Doctrine, talks about how our opposition forces of the status quo take advantage of undermining, creating tension in a society to then replace it with what their plan is. Well, we need to be able to do the same. I think we have to balance critique with proposal, opposition with proposition, so that it's clear that we are a movement with the leaders and ideas to run the country, that we have the capacity to deliver a society that appeals to what's best in people rather than what's worst in people, and that we start to decolonize the imagination and our lives and our time and repopulate that with aspirations for a world that we can be proud to hand our children.
Well, Bill, you are certainly both a preacher and a practitioner of civic imagination. Well, Bill, thank you so much for this conversation. My guest today is Bill Moyer. He's the co-founder of the Backbone Campaign, and we look forward to learning more about Bill's work.